Hello, everyone. I'm Hans Engel from the Directors Guild of Canada. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to DGC Visionaries 2021, where we celebrate DGC filmmakers' work at all the major film festivals across Canada. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional Indigenous lands that we all live and gather on today. Although this event is online and takes place at many locations, we each enjoy the privilege of living and working within an Indigenous territory. As a gesture of appreciation for our use of these lands, we ask that you join us in acknowledging the people who have lived and thrived in these regions across the continent for tens of thousands of years. We're extremely fortunate to have Carrie Swanson as our moderator. Carrie is an experienced executive and fundraiser dedicated to the growth and development of some of Canada's leading Indigenous arts organizations and initiatives over the last 17 years. Carrie is currently co-executive director of the Indigenous Screen Office, a funding and advocacy organization promoting Indigenous narrative sovereignty on screen. She served as both board chair and executive director of the Imaginative Film and Media Arts Festival, the world's largest presenter of Indigenous screen content. She's a co-founder of Indigenous Fashion Week Toronto at Harbourfront Centre. Carrie was associate director of granting at the Ontario Arts Council, where she launched the Indigenous Culture Fund, a $5 million annual program. She launched a number of innovative arts funding programs at the Toronto Arts Council, including the Toronto Arts Council Culture Leaders Lab at the Banff Centre, the Indigenous Arts Program, and the Open Door Fund. Carrie has a master's in communication and culture, and her project thesis on the work of Kent Monkman was nominated for Governor General's Silver Medal. Carrie was born and raised in Chapleau, Northern Ontario, in a Cree, Ojibwe, Irish, and French family. She is a band member of the Michipicoten First Nation with familial ties to Chapleau Cree First Nation. Amazing to have Carrie with us tonight. Our featured director tonight is Danis Goulet. Danis is a Cree Métis writer and director. Her films have screened at festivals around the world, including the Berlinale, Sundance, MoMA, and of course, TIFF. She's a former programmer for TIFF and former director of the Imaginative Film and Media Arts Festival. She's an alumna of the National Screen Institute and the TIFF Filmmakers Lab. She serves on the Indigenous Advisory Group for TIFF and is a member of the Academy of Motion Pictures, Arts and Sciences. Her debut feature, Night Raiders, which we're talking about tonight. I'm very excited. Premiered at the Panorama section of the 2021 Berlinale and is a gala presentation at TIFF 2021 this past Saturday, an amazing premiere here in Toronto at TIFF. Night Raiders is also in the running for the DGC Discovery Award, and it was just announced that it will be the opening night film at Imaginative coming up. So very, very exciting. Danis recently wrapped production on the Netflix thriller Ivy, starring Alice Braga. Danis is Cree Métis, originally from La Ronge in northern Saskatchewan in Canada, and now lives here in Toronto. I'm very excited to welcome Danis Goulet and Carrie Swanson. Come on in. I'm sure that applause is nothing like the applause that you got at TIFF the other night, but we had to add a little something to make it feel like we're doing something live. Welcome, Carrie and Danis, and again, huge congratulations on the film and on the Berlinale and on the recent TIFF opening night. So thank you for joining us tonight. For those of you tuning in, before I leave, I just want to point out the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. That's where you can type questions in. Carrie's going to be watching that for your questions as they come in. Type them throughout. Carrie will try to get to as many as she possibly can. And also for those of you, if there are any of you who don't know about the view button at the top of the Zoom screen, that's where you can alter your view between presenter and gallery view. Anyway, that's it for me. Really excited about this conversation. So thrilled to have you both here. I'll see you at the end. Have a great time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Hans, for the intro, and thank you everyone who's joining us here tonight and into the future. It's a huge honor. I can't say what a great honor it is enough to be having this chat with my good friend and longtime colleague, Danis Goulet. Danis and I are actually here in Toronto, also known as Toronto, only a few blocks away from one another. And we're joining you from the traditional territory and gathering place of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Huron-Wendat, and the treaty territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit. And I'm going to start by saying, just again, reiterating huge congratulations, Danis. It has been an incredible week for you, and you had a moving, wonderful, celebratory opening night at Roy Thompson Hall here on your home turf in Toronto with your whole family in attendance. It was like a huge reunion for the Indigenous film and arts community. Your movie was described by TIFF as one of the most important Canadian films in recent memory, and the Globe and Mail described it as likely to be the most talked about Canadian film of the year, with good reason. Not only that, but you were awarded with a TIFF Emerging Talent Award at the Tribute Awards, and you were trending on Twitter with Dionne Warwick. I mean, come on, it's been a pretty incredible week. So I just wanted to start by asking you how this all feels and what it was like to finally get to screen this film to live audiences.
Well, thanks, Carrie. For someone who doesn't take compliments very well, it's been a lot. It's amazing, obviously. You know, you are, as many people know, alone with your projects, especially during the writing process, and it takes many years to get them going. And at times it feels like you're going through the ups and downs and wondering if it's ever going to get made, but you just keep this little fire burning that's in your heart of the thing that you want to say and the things that you want to talk about. And for me, this is like, you know, it feels like I was really putting myself out there in terms of, you know, declaring what I wanted to talk about and how. And for it to be received in this way was just like unbelievable. I remember my first, and I used to program for TIFF as well. And so it's like a homecoming in many different ways. But I was actually very nervous. Like, obviously we were thrilled that it was at Berlinale. We couldn't go because of pandemic time. So the first time that I saw it with an audience was just a couple nights ago. But I remember when Cameron first, when I had my first conversation with him, and you know, he just talked about the film in this incredible way. And I just totally like broke down crying because it had been such a long journey to get it made. And also I was so, it's really nerve-wracking to put it in front of your colleagues and also the people whose opinions you kind of care about the most. And when it comes to TIFF and obviously Cameron, I just have so much respect for everybody there. And so I was particularly nervous to put it in front of TIFF, and then for it to be talked about in that way. And then obviously given a gala when it's a first feature, like all of these things were like completely unexpected. I think all of us, when we were making the film, could feel the energy of something special, but you just never know. And I was joking with the producer, Tara, and we're like, we don't know, you know, you don't know if you have an ugly baby. Like, it's not like like
everyone loves their baby.
Yeah, everyone loves their baby. And which isn't, anyway, it's just been incredible. And then Roy Thompson Hall with my family, and to have my dad there, and Elder Pauline Shirt, who's, you know, such a, you know, she's a landmark matriarch in our community, and to have her there, and she's in the film as well. So to have her there opening it, and you know, to feel our presence in that space was just like really so much bigger than me in the film. And yeah, it's been amazing so far.
Yeah, it was such a great night, Danis. I can't stop thinking about it. And I'm just, when I first saw a pre-screener early version of the film, as you know, I did jump out of my seat at the end and cheered because you just nailed it. You really knocked it out of the park. And I can't wait to talk to you more about it, but we're going to give our viewers an opportunity to see a trailer before we do that. So why don't you give us a quick little setup for the trailer, just a little synopsis of the film in your words.
Sure. Night Raiders is set in the year 2043. It imagines a post-Civil War North America where children are property of the state, and it's following Niska and Wasis, a Cree mother and daughter who are on the run to prevent her from being taken. And so, yeah, we can roll the trailer.
More will come. Who lives here? The city went dark after the war. No one can see your face. No one.
Is that a child?
No, it's okay.
See? I was beginning to believe that my boy was the only free one left.
Freeze!
You have a child at the academy?
She was taken in the fall.
The Academy want to start the war again, and they'll force our kids onto the front lines of it.
I'm gonna find her again, on the other side.
As long as we have one piece of land, they will always come for us.
Is it too late?
No, but we have to go now.
We pledge our hearts and give our allegiance to our glorious republic, and solemnly swear to protect it. One country, one language, one flag.
So good. So Danis, why don't you start by telling us how you came to this story? You wrote it as well as directed it. How did you come to this story, and why did you decide to tell it in this particular genre of dystopian sci-fi?
Yeah, I was around the winter of 2012. There was a protest movement that swept Canada called Idle No More. And at the time I'd been making short films, and I was kind of interested in like social realist storytelling. And I like loved Andrea Arnold, like so many other women. And I was kind of in the mode of, like going out on the festival circuit with my shorts. And then an opportunity came up to make a short film that was a commission to celebrate the Elgin and Winter Gardens 100th anniversary. And I had always thought that it would be challenging to tell a story about classic Cree characters from the oral storytelling tradition. And so I thought, oh, what if I challenged myself to do that? And also that those characters I thought had often been treated as though they were quaint and folkloric, when in fact, to me, they had gravity and they were the classic stories of this land. And I didn't feel like they were regarded that way. And so I made this short film called Awakening, and there was something, there's threads in my earlier short films like Wapawika, which is just a straight up drama about a father and son out on the land, but it sort of like explores kind of like the past and then the present, but also what threads exist into the future, or like what survives in culture. And so in Awakening, I also, wanted to counter the idea that these Indigenous characters exist only in the past. And it was like a way of saying, we have always been here, we are still here, and we will always be here. So to take these characters from what people think of as being in the past and place them in the future was like an interesting challenge for me. And so I made the film, and then moving into the genre space was like an incredible like awakening for me. It was so free, like not to be constrained by strict fiction. And I felt like you could still take the aesthetics of, you know, what you often see in independent film or like in social realism and apply them into the genre space. And then it creates this kind of like grounded realism with fantastical elements that I felt like was an intersection that I was really interested in, especially in Indigenous storytelling. Like I'd been so inspired by Indigenous films from all over the world, but I remember like one of my favorite Indigenous films is Zacharias Canuck's The Journals of Knud Rasmussen. And I remember the first time I watched that film, about halfway through, I had the revelation that a lot of the characters you're seeing on screen are spirits. But the film doesn't tell you that until you just discover it for yourself. And I think there is something about, you know, Indigenous cultures and, you know, like people might think of things like magical realism, but in our cultures, they're just presented as is. And so that grounded realism space that is then introduces fantastical elements was something that was really interesting to me, as something to explore. And so once I was in the dystopian future in Awakening, I just knew that I had to stay in that space for Night Raiders. And then I also wanted to talk about the impact of colonial policies on Indigenous people. And of course, the residential school system is just such a major one that have had profound impacts since it was in place for 7 generations of Indigenous families. And also, I remember the TRC released their findings in 2015, and they found that a child going into a residential school had the same chance, or had a greater chance of dying than a Canadian soldier did going into World War II. But when the TRC came out, it was like everyone was talking about reconciliation. And it was just like, you guys, like, we have to hold and acknowledge the truth first. And it was almost like by jumping quickly to reconciliation, it was like people couldn't even handle staying with the truth. It's like, oh, let's all go hold hands and just pretend everything's okay. And it's like, in order for people to heal, that truth has to be acknowledged. We have to be able to hold it and say the word genocide. And, you know, now this summer, like these years after the TRC has done its work, you know, communities are engaged in the process of uncovering graves of thousands of children. And we're just at the beginning of this process. It's very painful. But that to me is a part of the necessary reckoning of the truth. And let's talk more about that before we like move on too quickly to reconciliation, because there is still so much healing to be done. And so I felt like if you know, obviously I wanted to talk about the impact of that on families in Night Raiders, but I also felt like the genre opened up a fresh entry point into something that people may feel fatigued by. And then I also felt like, you know, when you go into an imaginary space that doesn't exist, and even a time that doesn't exist yet, it offers a layer of protection to everybody, you know, me as a creative, but also the actors. You know, I think it can be, yeah, really challenging when you're, yeah, it's a tough subject matter. So it's just like it, you know, when you fictionalize something, it offers protection in some way.
Yeah, that's so interesting. There's so many threads to pick up on everything that you just said. One of them is this idea of Indigenous futurism and this coming together of science fiction with Indigenous knowledge, language, storytelling, to open up new possibilities for understanding that past, present, future, and how they're all connected. And you know, there's a scholar, Dr. Grace Dillon, who's spoken about that in itself as being a really powerful decolonial tool. And it sounds like, you know, you're placing yourself in that much broader context of, because we're seeing this happen across different mediums. It's happening in gaming, and we're seeing Indigenous comics and storytelling. And do you want to just speak a little bit about that broader context for your work and how you place yourself within that?
Yeah, I don't think when I just started developing the project that I thought that much about the larger context of Indigenous futurism, although certainly we had seen it happening in things around us. And I think, obviously it was a dialogue that was very related to Afrofuturism, which, like I think the reference points were easier to find and went further back. And I can't remember who coined the term, but I think an academic started talking about Indigenous futurism back in the 90s. But to me, it's just it's a political act, but it's also a subversive act to declare that we will be here in the future when all of these policies were designed to eradicate us. It's a declaration that will never happen. And so it's, it has power to it. And it also sort of like creates, and I think what Pauline Schurt, the elder Pauline, when you hear her voice at the beginning of the film, it just has this beautiful, timeless quality. And that part of the film actually was never scripted. We discovered that in the edit, and it absolutely creates exactly the right container for the story that we needed, that we only solved when we were in, the back half of the edit.
And also, I think really importantly, that line, that sentence that you're referring to is in the Cree language. And one of the things that I love about this film is the cultural specificity that you bring. It's a Cree story, and Cree language is really at the heart of it. And I just wanted to hear from you about your journey with learning Cree, with bringing it into your work, and how that played out in the process of filmmaking and writing the story.
Yeah, so I don't speak Cree as a first language. I'm a learner. My dad is a fluent Cree language speaker. He learned how to speak English in school, and in his community where he went to school, they were taught by nuns from the residential schools, and the nuns used to refer to them as little black savages. And, obviously we know the role that residential schools played in eradicating as much as they possibly could Indigenous languages by forbidding them to be spoken. So again, it's like a declaration when you even just have the presence of Cree in the film, but also it means a lot to me personally, because within my own family, it's like the language stops with my dad. And so one of the most important things that I do in the development of any film is I just sit at the kitchen table with my dad back home in Saskatchewan, and we just talk about Cree concepts. And it's not a process of translation. It is a process of trying to access, like Cree philosophical thought and conceptual thought, so that I can try in my limited ability to weave that into the development process, because my dad thinks in Cree first, and then he'll come over to English, and it's really amazing, because I think in English first. So it's like he'll come at things in a totally different way and with a different perspective. And the value of that, the language is just like, can't be, overstated. It's like he just adds such a richness, because the language is the original, Indigenous languages are the original languages of this land, but also there's universes in them, and they're so poetic and they're so beautiful. Yeah, to have that as a part of development is really important. And then, I often include Cree language on screen, and I know that, Gail Maurice beautifully spoke about it. She's a Cree Métis actor, originally from Beauval, Saskatchewan, and she said the opportunity to act in the language is just like, incredible. And so, yeah, and then for myself personally, I go to a Cree language camp in Saskatchewan called the Nehewak Language Experience, run by my teacher Belinda Daniels and many other Cree teachers, and that process of starting to learn Cree as an adult has been one of the most incredible experiences of my life. Like it gives in a way that nothing else does. Because I think, what we experience so much as Indigenous people or as other people of color or Black folks is like that you're so stuck in fight mode, and the fight takes so much out of it. And it also, you have to take a certain shape to everything when you're in fight mode. And when you go into rooms in the industry and you're advocating for change or you're advocating for your story, it is so important for us to find like regenerative spaces and caring and nurturing spaces. And to me, the Cree language camp is like, it's just so beautiful. Like to me, it's nation building. And it's the opposite of like damage control. It actually feels like it's building and creating something new for the future. And the other thing is that I feel like that's also what I get from the Indigenous screen community, which you and I have been a part of for so long. Like we started back at Imaginative in the early days. I joined the programming committee in 2003, and I was new to Toronto at the time. And I just came into this Indigenous screen community, and then, eventually was director of the festival and worked with you there. And then you took over the festival. But coming into that Indigenous screen community at a time where, sometimes it felt like you would go into rooms and just feel like, making the case for an Indigenous director at the helm of a feature film was just met with like blank stares and like awkward silences. That, but that there was a collective of many of us all over Canada and even globally through this international Indigenous community that were collectively holding a vision. And you and I took the time to author a report on the lack of Indigenous feature film production. And I did not want to author a report. Like that's the last thing I wanted to do. But I felt like we had to keep pushing the doors open to make the case to make this happen so that, like the doors would open up. But the screen community that we've both been a part of is just like, it just draws so much strength and inspiration. And whenever we go home to Imaginative, it's just like, you just feel like it's like catharsis and like togetherness and like love and community. And we all need that.
It's so true. And we've all missed it so much. And I think that was, one of the most joyful things about gathering at your opening was just seeing everyone and just being together again, and especially to celebrate your work. At that night, you, when you introduced the film, you said 3 words that were at the core of this work, and you've touched on all of them already. And that was resistance, perseverance, and love. And you talk, and now I'm going to start crying. But you talked about resistance a little bit, behind the scenes, and even just thinking about back when you made the short film, one of your short films, how you had to fight to have the Cree language in that film. And, industry executives were telling you that they thought you should take it out. And this was a traditional story that you were bringing to the screen. So, there's resistance at all stages, in front, on screen and off screen. And I'm just thinking about that one example, and I'm wondering, has the fight gotten easier? Has the industry changed yet? Are you finding that those responses are not what you're hearing anymore?
Well, I think, when I was developing Night Raiders, we kept it really, like Tara Woodbury was the key creative producer, and we kept it really tight between us until we felt like it was ready to go out. But then when we finally took it out, it was like coming at this incredible political moment where it felt like things were opening up. And as you know, Carrie, both of us have been involved in advocacy, but, there are also decades of Indigenous creatives that have done advocacy before us. And when I think back to like the first wave of Indigenous film that really started with the activist documentary and like, a group of filmmakers at the NFB, or like the fights that Alanis Obomsawin had to face in rooms where she was so alone and so singular in what she was doing. It has really taken us so long to get to a certain place, but the barriers are real. Like, I definitely had that experience when I was making a short where I got a call 2 weeks before we were start to shoot saying, oh, we think this would all be better if you just said it in English. And it's like, my film is about Cree cultural revitalization. Like, do you understand how that just counters everything about what the film is trying to say? And there was nobody around me to defend it. It wasn't like there was a partner or somebody to say, oh, Danis, forget about it. I'll have this conversation with the broadcaster so you don't have to. It was like, I had to be the one to call them and then have a conversation about why it was so important to hear the Cree language on film. And I remember the broadcaster saying, oh, well, you're trumping a creative decision with your politics, which was so deeply insulting, because in my heart and soul, I knew that Cree was a stronger creative choice. I mean, as a programmer, I know that specificity of characters, place, world, culture is very powerful on film. The more specific you make it, the more universal it becomes. So to try to take, and not to mention that this is exactly what colonization tried to take from us. So now, you're telling me that you can't, it can't be included for like reasons of accessibility because people are not going to want to read a subtitle. And like, since that happened, I was just like, damn, I had all these lines that I have prepped now. It's like, if Jabba the Hutt can freaking speak in his Jabba language in the biggest movie of all time, then I can freaking have Cree characters that speak Cree in my films too. But I didn't, I was just trying to think of the arguments at the time. But I came off that call and I was shaking, and the only power I had was to say no. And so I just said, I'm sorry you feel that way. I won't make my film any other way. So I guess if I have to walk away, I will. And this is 2 weeks to production. And that's the line I had to take. And then they were like, okay. And another thing that was said to me is like, I don't know if you'll be able to find the actors that will deliver this in Cree in the same way. And it's like, how insulting is that to the talent in our communities? Like, to me, that is straight up racism to say. And so again, I had to make a case of like the way I would work with the actors, which I just shouldn't have to do. And then when we got Night Raiders into development, we also went to another major broadcaster. We got notes back on the film and they were like, wow, it's a propulsive story with great characters and it like really is great. And so all these craft notes were like given the thumbs up, and then comes the note, but I don't think this allegory for residential schools really works anymore because priests are no longer beating children. So we as a country have moved on from this. And that was right in the notes. I'm like, okay, so I'm the one accused of being political, because I'm pretty sure that's not a creative note. That's actually a political note that is being funneled through a major broadcaster. And again, I had to go into a meeting with the broadcaster and defend, and explain and try to articulate why this is wrong. And, when something's so personal to you like that, it is not about arguing about intellectual ideas. This is something that you deeply care about, and it takes a lot out of you to mount arguments. But this is what Indigenous filmmakers have had to do all along the way. But by the time we finally came to make Night Raiders, I just feel like the gates were opening, and we had advocated for the establishment of the Indigenous Screen Office, where you're now the co-head, and we had advocated for the targeted funding stream at Telefilm based on the report that you and I had written and the voices of so many others in the community that had said that we needed to be funding more Indigenous people in key creative roles at the helm of well-resourced projects. So in the year before Night Raiders got made, Blood Quantum got made by Jeff Barnaby, and it was the largest budget Indigenous directed film at the time. And then my film got made the next year, and that became the largest budget. So there were like two back to back that I feel like there was something opening up. But it's sort of like you push and push and push, and then all of a sudden it's like a flood all at once. So it's like
Yeah.
the barriers are still there, but we're like in a new time now, like something has changed, and I don't think we ever need to go back. And it's a really exciting time. There's like this incredible wave that we're seeing now that is so beautiful, and it's something we've been trying to get to for so many years. So it's just like so incredible to feel a part of that.
I think, it's so important, Danis, to share these stories. It's hard enough to make a feature film, your first feature. It's hard enough to make a short film when you're an emerging filmmaker, and to also have to advocate for yourself, and to constantly push against the status quo is just another added layer on the work itself. And on that theme of resistance, the stories of resistance around residential schools and around the colonial history of Canada have always been present. The Indigenous resistance has always been present, but we really don't hear a lot of those stories in the mainstream media. And was that on your mind as well, that you were addressing a gap in the narrative, in the historical storytelling of this country?
Definitely. I mean, it was Indigenous resistance that got the schools to close, and I don't think that story's really been told yet. It was Indigenous resistance of people standing up in the community and saying this is no longer okay. And then moments where survivors were brave enough to stand up and say what happened to them, which then became the catalyst for the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's formation. I mean, there's just been years of work to lead up to that. And, but the system was the law. And I think we like failed to realize just how difficult that would have been to contend with. I mean, I tried to present that in the film, like the impossible choice that parents had, in the scene in the market where Niska's faced with a decision. And it's kind of like one of the things that was so striking to me when I was listening to some of the TRC hearings was a father standing up in front of this room full of people, and he was crying and he was apologizing to his children for not being a good dad, and that he felt like he failed them. And it was so heartbreaking to know that he had internalized all of that shame when it was a system that was imposed upon him. And yet parents internalize that as their choice. They think they did it to their children, when in fact it was done to them and to their children, and that they're all victims of systemic racism and an attempt to eradicate Indigenous people, and that is so big. The courage of survivors to stand up and be seen and heard is like, it's amazing. Like, it's just, I still can't believe how much courage that would have taken. And it was definitely so inspiring as I wrote this story about, that power and that resistance and that courage, to do that.
Yeah, you really captured Niska's feeling of guilt and shame around her choice, her decision, which was, as you said, it was an impossible one. And that was one of the most powerful moments in the film. And I think it's really resonant. One of the things about this work as well is that you center Indigenous women, Indigenous warrior women. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about that, about, in our years of imaginative, the industry is now coming to gender parity, but we have always had a really amazing, incredible, strong, powerful contingent of women filmmakers and women community leaders. And I just wanted to ask you a little bit about that. Who are some of the women that you admire? Who are some of your inspirations? You mentioned Danis Obamsawin, but I just wanted to talk a little bit about the role of women as warriors in the film and beyond.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that came from two places. One was the incredible women that you've just talked about that have been a part of the Indigenous screen community and the work that they've done. And I remember one year we were in Berlin, and Jason Ryle, who was the director of Imaginative at the time, was saying, they were talking about gender in the industry, and he was like, oh yeah, 70% of our directors at Imaginative this year are women. And it's just like, boom, you know, and it was like that as a norm. It wasn't even like a rarity. So women in our screen community have been so present, and they've been like, I was a part of facilitating a collective of women called the Embargo Collective. That was Lisa Jackson, Elmaya Tailfeathers, Carolyn Monet, Zoe Lee Hopkins, Helen Haig Brown. Who am I forgetting? Did I say Lisa Jackson?
Yeah.
And yes, anyway, and so all of
Zoe
those women,
Zoe Hopkins.
Yeah, Zoe Lee Hopkins. And yeah, like, you know, women have been so present in that. And then the early filmmakers like, you know, Alanis, of course, and people like Loretta Todd, who have been working for years and years to get their stories told. And then also people that, you know, really were the first through the gates, like Shirley Chichu, who now runs a film festival in a school, you know, on her reserve in Northern Ontario. And it's like, who is doing that work? Or Darlene Naponce up in Atikameksheng, you know, up in her community, doing work like right there in her community. Or like Doreen Manuel, who's out on the West Coast and like, you know, mentoring a whole new generation of people. Or the folks at the NSI, or like, you know, there's so many people. I'm sure I've forgotten people, because there's so many people that have inspired me. And then I also wanted to, you know, reflect the role of Indigenous matriarchs in resistance movements, because they are badass women out there. And, you know, speaking of Idle No More, which I was really inspired by, that was started by 4 women on the prairies. And so I think, you know, women are badass and they're powerful, but also that their leadership shows up in different ways. So Violet Nelson's character, for example, like, she is tasked with leading the charge at the very end of the movie. And she, to me, is like radiant and beautiful, and just like, there's a quality about her that is just so stunning, but she is not the archetype of what you would expect a warrior woman to be. And to me, that was really important, because, you know, the people that I know in my community back home in Northern Saskatchewan, it's like, you know, so often they're shy, or they don't necessarily like come out in this loud way, or like it's kind of like the Euro-Western archetype of leadership. But I wanted to really honor that there are different styles of leadership, and that, you know, there are different ways to show up that doesn't have to look a certain way. So it's really important to me that we cast kind of against type in a way, you know, for that, like, for that kind of like incredible, you know, warrior woman. And then Gail Maurice, of course, just like blows away. She's just so powerful on screen. And
so
I've
incredible.
worked with Gail before, and I love Gail, and she is such a gem, you know, in our community, as the talented, incredible actor that she is. And then also that she's retained her language as a Cree speaker. It's like, she just offers so much, you know. I just feel like, yeah, it was so important for Gail to be a part of this too. And Elder Pauline, of course.
Yeah, and all of these women that you're referring to bring to mind that word, perseverance. One of those 3 words that you said on opening night. You know, Gail, for example, has been persevering in this industry for decades, and to finally see her being able to embody everything that she is by being able to speak her language. Cree-Machif is her first language. To be able to see her acting on screen in her language brings a whole element, a powerful element to her acting that she has not had the opportunity to express on screen before. Pauline Shirt has started the First Nations school here in Toronto. You know, all of these women are warriors who've persevered over decades to really lead the way to these opportunities that we're seeing now. So it's it was really incredible to see them honored in this way on screen in your film. Another thing I wanted to talk about was that other third word, which is love. And there is so much love and care that has gone into this film, and you see it on the screen. And I know that there was so much taking place behind the scenes to ensure that, you know, that the actors were cared for, that care was taken with, you know, a difficult story. Can you talk a little bit about some of the, you know, what a community-centered approach looks like on a big movie like Night Raiders?
Yeah, I mean, first off, I will say that I think we are still challenged by set culture across the board, and it's why it's so important that we continue to advocate for Indigenous people on set in all roles and across the board, and for more collaboration. You know, like the Indigenous Screen Office funded the mentorship program that placed Indigenous crew on our set. And I think people traditionally think about mentorship as sort of like this one-way street, whereas like I think of it as an exchange. And so it's not like, oh, wow, we're giving these people like this great opportunity. And I hope we did that. But it's also the way that, you know, they give back to the production by virtue of their presence. You know, like nobody wants to walk onto a set and be the only one, whether you're the PA or the director, you know. And I told them a couple of days before shooting how much it meant to me that they were there, and how that this space was their space. They could claim it, because also sets are so hierarchical. And when I worked on set in my really early days, when I used to work in casting, and then I was also on set on certain jobs, it's like, it, you know, you saw people being badly treated all over the place. And I had bad experiences with, like, you know, men just like throwing around their weight and being horrible. And, you know, I think we still have a lot of work to do, but I think all of the ways in which we can counter that, the way that set culture works, is really incredible. And to have the presence of them was incredible as well. And, you know, in terms of the actors, you know, the actors are bringing their lived experience to the role. And I know that all actors do that. But I think in the context of telling a story about residential schools, it's like that is particularly heightened and sensitive. And so you have to create a bubble of safety for the actors to do the work that they're going to do. And Elmaya was like, she blew me away with her courage and the way that she was willing to go there. And then Brooklyn as well, who played Wasis. I mean, she's just like this bright shining light, and she just, you know, was carrying the movie on her. She's a co-lead, and she was 13 years old and having to carry the movie on her shoulders as a young actor, but also, you know, like, this is a story that grapples with the legacy of something that happened in so many of our families. So you have to create an environment of safety so that they can do the work that they set out to do. And there was this one day where we were shooting a really difficult scene, and I could just feel how hard it was. I said to one of the actors, do you need to smudge right now? And they said, yeah. And so I just said, okay, we like went out to the ADs, got on the walkie, call out for a smudge on set, which is like, for anyone that doesn't know, it's a way of cleansing. It's with smoke, and you burn it. And anyway, we just halted until we could get a smudge into the actor. And everyone knows what it is to halt a production that's that big and a machine that big. But I just, again, would not proceed until we could do it in the right way. And the person that had the smudge on set was one of the Indigenous mentees that were hired through the ISO. Mm-hmm. So if he hadn't been there that day, and he told me the story later that his son had placed it in his car saying, Dad, you might need this, like you should take this smudge. And it's just like, not only do we need to have access to those cultural practices, but we also have to signal to everybody just how much those cultural practices are valued. And so it's sort of like, oh no, this is just as important as getting the lighting right. Like this is just as important as all of that. And the associate producer, Eva Thomas, was tasked with sort of like the cultural piece. And it was also so important that we communicated at all times how important her role was, that was producing, and that, oh, you've got producers that get your financing attached. In my mind, the producers that are doing community outreach and working with the elders and making sure that things are done in a good way, their work is just as important. And also because, you know, we're still finding our way through trying to lead a filmmaking process in accordance to certain values. You know, those values often clash with film practices, with business practices. And so you end up in a lot of sometimes conflict over the ways to move forward because they're at odds with how the industry does it. So there's still a lot that has to change, but you know, we tried to push as much as we could to create those spaces and to like try to do things in a way that made the actors safe.
Yeah, it's incredible to me sometimes when we do the protocols sessions. The ISO has resources and guides, and we often do just talks and discussions about what protocols look like on set. And often people are really blown away by it, but the reality is these are very simple things to implement and incorporate in many ways. They're really about giving space to people when they need it, about respect, reciprocity, you know, treating people as equals. And it is amazing to me always how surprising some of these concepts are to the industry at large. Another thing about care, though, was not only in the way that you operated on set and in the making of the movie, but also in the presentation of the movie. You've done a lot of work. I've seen language that precedes the movie and different things that you've done. Can you speak a little bit about those extra additional acts of care that you've put in place?
Yeah, I mean, I think that work just needs to be done as we move forward. And the pathways and protocols document that was created and circulated, we circulated that and said that it was mandatory reading for all of the crew. And we also put in a half-day, I don't know if it's a training session, but it was basically a talk about colonization 101. And it was like 1 or 2 days out from like the first day of principal photography. And it was a half day and it was mandatory. So to have crew, you know, when they're so busy, have to take the time for something like that, it felt, I think, overwhelming, but it was also so amazing to do that. Like we brought someone in and all of a sudden you could just see in the room like the light bulbs going off about the script as written and sort of like the purpose for why we're all here. And again, it's sort of like, you know, film is a job and you have to respect it as a workplace, but also, you know, I come from a purpose-driven place. And I think that as much as you can try to bring people into that to feel a part of it, whether they're Indigenous or not, you know, I think it can help people get on board and sort of start to understand, oh, this is what we're doing and why.
Yeah, yeah. And with difficult content like this as well, we see this a lot at Imaginative. We put warnings in front of films, but we also offer resources to people if they need to contact an elder or someone who can support them if the film brings up you know, trauma for them. So all of those things were in place, which I think it's really important for the industry to be aware that all of this additional work accompanies, you know, often accompanies Indigenous content, and particularly the care that Indigenous filmmakers are putting into this work at all levels. So I want to talk now a little bit about this Indigenous screen community that you've been talking about. We've been talking a little bit about in our convo, and it's a global one. And over many years, these relationships have been formed And you've mentioned so many different names, and these people intersect and connect in many different ways, as collaborators, as actors in your film, as producers. And over the years, these relationships have developed, for example, with Aotearoa, with filmmakers who are Maori, and that led to this being the first Indigenous international co-production. It's a Cree Maori co-production. And I wanted to hear more about how that came to be and what that looked like in practice.
Well, I think, you know, I was really excited about expressing the connections of the global Indigenous community, as we'd been meeting up for so many years, and those connections were so organic, and we were so bonded by this similar experience under colonization in our various countries. And we had experienced that at Imaginative for years. But the Embargo Collective that I'd been talking about, which was that collective of women, the first iteration of it also included international artists, and like Taika Waititi was a part of that, and Black Horse Low and Sterling Harjo. And we had been connected to like and inspired by many Australian Indigenous filmmakers like Warwick Thornton and Rachel Perkins and Ivan Sen, and these people in their respective countries all doing such amazing work. And to me, I wanted to reflect that somehow. And I actually was a part of, I was facilitating a script lab for Imaginative up on Darlene Neponce's reserve, and she was our host, and we had some participants in that lab. And we brought up a Maori writer, Briar Grace Smith, and then her and I just like formed this bond, and she's a really good friend. And then when I came to make Night Raiders, I was like, oh, it'd be great to, you know, include that, because we've been in solidarity together for so long. And also we had been, like many people had also been dreaming about this for a long time. Like the NSI set up this program like probably in the early 2000s, if I'm remembering correctly, that sent a contingent of Canadians down to New Zealand and Australia to see if they could facilitate that. So like people had the idea, it wasn't like it was new. And then also I feel like we had been watching the way the circumpolar Indigenous people are really interconnected, and they had created this Arctic Film Fund. So we were seeing that kind of happen. And so when it came to the film, I included this one character, and I went to my friend Briar and I was like, what do you think of this? Does this feel authentic in the way this character is engaging in the story? And and it was an early draft of the script too, like it was pretty early on. And she said that she felt it did make sense to her. And then also when I did research and I went to Standing Rock, and I remember there was a moment where they momentarily stopped the pipeline, and one of the Indigenous environmental organizations on the ground, the first thing that they did was thank the Maori contingent that had been there in solidarity. So then it was like, and we had these relationships already. So, you know, at some point I approached Taika about being an EP, and he was totally enthusiastic. And then we, you know, Ainsley Gardner, who's one of New Zealand's like most celebrated producers in her own right, like let alone Indigenous producer, she came on board, and we were so lucky to have her. And then Chelsea Winstanley came on board as a producing partner who was there on set. And yeah, like those connections were already there. And so it was sort of like just a matter of then trying to see how we could make the funding agencies in both of those countries work together, which I wasn't a part of. That was really facilitated by like Tara Woodbury and Paul Barkin as the producers, along with Ainsley, who were just like, you know, did amazing things to make it all happen. But yeah, it was really exciting. Like I'd always wanted this to be the first Indigenous co-production between the two countries.
It's so exciting, Danis, because it's been 17 years in the making, these relations of kinship that have been developed across, you know, across continents over so many years. And it's just, I really see it as the next stage in the evolution of Indigenous cinema, to see this happening in that way. And I was wondering, before we go to audience questions, because we do have a couple, what do you see as the next phase of Indigenous cinema? What are you excited about? And yeah, what's making you feel excited and energized after the brilliant week you've had?
Well, I feel like my film is situated in a wave. Like nobody wants to be the only one. So there's like incredible film that's like coming out into the world right now. You know, like obviously Jeff Barnaby is a leader in Indigenous genre. Nyla Inukshuk just finished her film Slashback, which is her like alien invasion far north movie. There's just the
teen slasher
proliferation.
movie,
Yeah, totally. I love it. And it's just like, you know, I think Indigenous directors, like, so I think the next steps are that we have permission in a way to go into every genre of film, and that those doors are opening and that the support will be there. Bigger budgets for Indigenous directors. I would also like to see more development at all levels of the industry, like the changing of set culture that I was talking about earlier. Like I would love to go onto a set and just feel more Indigenous presence, you know, in the telling of our stories. And like, there's no issue with collaboration and cross-cultural collaboration. You know, we definitely need allies out there fighting these battles for us too. And I would say that my producer, Tara, felt like she took on that role so seriously as like this fierce protector of my creative vision and also of the values that we were trying to protect. And she just put herself on the line and burned for it over and over again. And so those relationships, you know, outside of our community are also needed and necessary. But you know, it would be so amazing to just have that presence. But you know, like right now we're just seeing this explosion of like, you know, even in the US, which has been like a desert for years because they haven't had you know, like they don't have federal funding for their content, but you know, like Sterling Harjo's Reservation Dogs is out in the world, and Rutherford Falls Sierra Ornellis's show is out there, and we're seeing things on a scale that we've never seen before. And I want to get past the days when it's just about the singular person that's gotten somewhere, you know, like even when Zacharias Canuck made Atanarja with the Fast Runner and it won the Camera d'Or at Cannes, that should have opened up like a proliferation of Indigenous film. And it was like crickets after that. It was like the industry did not respond at all. And so then it took, and Isuma continued to advocate. And then like, and also Alethea Arnicook Barrel is up in her community advocating on behalf of so many people in the far north. And it's just like all of this work means that we will have greater resources, greater opportunities and visibility at all levels of the industry, including at funding bodies, at broadcasters, because we need people in those roles as well. Otherwise, we're going to continue as filmmakers to be in conversations like the one I had with that guy about notes about how residential schools are not relevant.
Yeah. Well, perseverance. Isuma has absolutely been at the forefront. And you're right, it took 20 years for the wave to follow that stunning feature film that is, you know, one of the most incredible films from this land. I also want to give a shout out to another Indigenous film at TIFF by Britton Hannum. It's called Wildhood. It's a queer coming of age story that is just fantastic. And again, it's so exciting to see an Indigenous filmmaker knock it out of the park this way with a larger budget than probably would have been possible for first feature a few years ago. And it's also has a very strong Mi'kmaq language component. So a lot of filmmakers are coming back to language, and really that's part of the revitalization, and that is the resistance. And we're seeing that in a really exciting way now in cinema. And this one's going to be dubbed in Mi'kmaq as well. So I've got a couple questions, and Danis, the first one is someone wants to know what advice you would give to a director working towards their first feature, practical or creative. And I had also been wondering about this and maybe some advice about working with actors, because you are fantastic with actors. I've heard many people say that they love working with you. And so yeah, maybe some practical advice about that, or anything for a new director.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing about trying to get your feature made is like, just don't give up hope, like keep that little fire burning. There were many times where I felt like I was going nowhere fast. And you also feel like in the writing process, you get lost in the woods and you're going in circles. And it's really important to realize that that's just a part of the process, but you don't realize it until you look back in retrospect. So it's really challenging at times to like have faith in the process, especially for me, because it was my first time writing a long form script. The other thing I would say is vet the people that you work with, like really, especially if you are values driven and it's not like you're just making some nifty project and, you know, whatever. It's like, for a lot of us, these are passion projects, and you want to make sure that you're partnering and surrounding yourself with the people that share your values. You know, there's like, sometimes the film industry can be, yeah, there's a lot of people out there, like, I'm just going to be frank, there's a lot of people out there taking advantage because it's a shiny industry at times. And it's really important to find those people and build relationships and trust with the people that are like-minded. And sometimes those people, by the way, are your peers. And that's what I've found in the Indigenous screen community, which has been such a gift. You know, it's like, yeah, I mean, Tasha Hubbard gave me my first job on a film set. And now all these years later, we're still friends, and we talk about the challenges that we're up against. And that supports me more than like the conversation I'm supposed to have with a very important person at the networking event. And all of that is worthy, by the way, but it's more just like, that's what's gonna feed you and keep you going at the end of the day, is the people that you've, you know, that share your experiences and that, like, you know, you can talk to about what you're going through. And then, you know, with working with actors, I actually started out in my short films with often working with non-actors. And what I would do is just talk to people that had done it before me. So when I went to make my film Wapawika, or when I went to make Barefoot, and both of them were made with Wapawika was actually made with members of my family who then acted in a drama, which was a total experiment. But then Barefoot was made all with youth who had never acted on screen before. And so I called up my friend Andrew McLean, who directed this beautiful movie called On the Ice. And I talked to him and his producer, and I just said, okay, guys, like, what are your methods? Like, lay it out. What do you do? And they said, it's a, you know, working with non-actors is actually a very rigorous process. And you want to, so I ended up, for Barefoot, one of my early short films, I ended up building in a workshop period that was just as long as shooting, which is obviously rare in film. We don't usually see the time for rehearsal like that. So, and it's predetermining things that you think will help with the process. So in those two short films, we built a lot of time into the schedule so that it's just like, yeah, if you're kind of floundering, you can just find your way through it because there's time to do it. So we didn't shoot on like a regular production schedule. We were probably shooting like almost double that. And I mean, it's easier to do in short films. Like, I think you feel more pressure in features to do that. But, you know, with acting, like, I get daunted by working with actors. It's actually a vulnerable thing. It's a vulnerable interchange. The fact that it's daunting is okay. Like, you're trying to hold another human being in what they're doing and in their performance. And I still like research methods. Like, you know, I've been a part of workshops that talk about the like giving verb-based direction, which I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with, as opposed to like talking about emotions, like be more angry. You talk about either what the objective of the scene is or what their objective is, or you try to give them verb-based, you know, so there's all kinds of methods that have been established. But to me, you know, you're trying to establish trust first and foremost. So first of all, you better be trustworthy, but also that I think it's about a quality of attention, and it's about making space. And sometimes there's almost like a mystery to that you have to trust yourself, because you think you have to fill up the space with method, you know, like with whatever you learned in the workshop about how to direct actors. I mean, I actually learned a lot by taking acting workshops myself, like where they put directors through acting workshops, and you can feel the difference in the scene when you're given different directions. So I would say that was definitely helpful to me, but also that nothing beats a kind of quality of attention and making space at times for the actors to do the work they need to do. And I find even just, you know, you read a scene and then you have conversations about it. And then there are like a lot of revelations that come out of those conversations that are really helpful. So I try not to fret about working with actors, but it's a vulnerable thing. And I think it's okay for that to feel hard sometimes.
We have a question from Jesse Wente.
Jesse!
Hi, Jesse. He says
another
incredible,
tireless advocate that we are so grateful for. It's great to hear you, Jesse.
He says the sound design is fabulous. Danis, can you talk about your approach to the soundscape and music?
Yeah, I mean, actually, the sound design was all done down in New Zealand. Around the time that we locked picture, we also locked down, the whole world locked down. So we finished the remainder of post remotely, and I was originally supposed to go down to New Zealand to work with the sound teams. But we had these amazing sound designers that Ainsley Gardner found. And, you know, I worked completely remotely with them, and it was challenging at times, but I think I talked about the sound design as, I don't know, you just always want to avoid, like, at least for me, like sometimes when you go into the genre space, there are a whole bunch of expected choices. And so you just try to find sounds that feel unique. And the sound designers that we worked with down there were amazing. And then the composing team were Taika's composers from Hunt for the Wilder People. They're called Moniker. And they also are musicians with like a band. So they're like an indie band from New Zealand. And there's 3 of them, and they just like would get in their studio, and they had a really collaborative and like unique approach to the creation of the music. So that was really cool to work with them. And then the sound mix was done here in Toronto at Sim. And they're just like world-class sound mixers at Sim, which used to be Tattersall. Like it's just incredible. Like I was even just with the mixers, Lou and Graham, at the like tech check for TIFF at Roy Thompson Hall, and like the way they know their craft is so incredible. And the other advice I would give is just about like when you assemble your team, you know, that the choices you make for your keys are just so important. You know, it's just like, because everybody in this process, film is so collaborative, but I look at everybody as artists. And so my expectation is that they're going to come with their own vision in whatever field they're working with. And then hopefully that vision aligns with your vision. And then when the 2 visions come together, it elevates the entire thing. Like that's the goal. So I never think of people as like technicians or I'm going to just download the way I think it should be. Like, I think the magic happens in collaboration. And sometimes I don't know, like, I don't know. There's just so many ideas about what a director is, and like that they're the person in the know and they're the auteur with the vision. And I just like love to be collaborative and to, you know, for them to bring their vision and then for us to just like go at it together.
I think we have time for one last question before I ask a closing question, and we've got one here. It says, strong women on screen is exactly what the world needs. Hear, hear. Have you received feedback about the power of your characters?
Absolutely. I think that, you know, obviously the film's just still getting out into the world, but I think that people are incredibly struck by the performances of the cast across the board. I've heard incredible things about Violet Nelson. I remember when we had an editor come in to help us with, like, with the final cut, and he'd said to me, "Is the elder in your movie," which is Pauline Shirt, "is she an actor?" And I was like, well, she's an elder first and foremost, but she did do some theater acting in the 70s. And he was like, wow, like it just goes to show you that presence is presence, you know, like she was just blown away by her. And, you know, like Almaya as the central character, like it was so incredible, even for me. And I've seen it like countless times. And to be, I see it on the big screen at Roy Thompson Hall, I was like, she is incredible what she does. Like the way that she expresses the complexity of what the character is going through. And then even when she makes like what are questionable choices, it's like we're just with her, and the way that she understands that to be trauma behavior, and the way that trauma affects your capacity when it comes to decision making. And then Brooklyn, of course, like we searched for 300, like we saw 300 kids for that role, and she was a standout, and we found her in Winnipeg. And Gail and the power of working in the language, like all of these things that we've talked about. Then you put all these women together on screen, and like, I'm sorry, like it's just like, again, so much of your job. The thing they say about casting where it's like 90%, like I totally believe that. And I have a bias because I worked in casting early in my career, but yeah, it's like, wow, you know, people like that, there's a power of that on screen, and it's so there. And so, yes, I've heard many comments about performance and their presence on screen.
So wrapping up, Danis, I mean, it's been so amazing chatting with you. I can't believe how fast an hour and almost an hour and a half has gone by. And thank you for sharing so much about your process and your work and your advocacy, which has always been so inspiring to me and to so many people. And I just wanted to ask you, what's next? What are you working on next? And do you have any dream projects? Now's the time, just put them out there. I heard you were hanging out with Denis Villeneuve's the other night, so you know, put it out there. Dune.
I said to Denis, we said hello, and then I said, I'm really excited to see your movie like the rest of the universe.
Nice one, smooth.
I don't know. What do you say? He's like a master in his field, and like so, like such a visionary. Yeah. I just like I shot a Netflix thriller in COVID times this summer with the Brazilian actor Alice Braga. She's brilliant and astonishing and amazing, and it was such an honor to work with her. So I go back to the edit suite first thing tomorrow morning, because we are like right in the process right now. And then I also just got development money earlier this year from the ISO, props Jesse and Carrie and the whole team, to tell a story about, like it's a period piece that is set in my hometown in La Ronge, Saskatchewan. And it feels too early to talk about it, but I'm really excited about the potential. I just need to do community work before I can take it up in earnest. And it's been, you know, when it goes, you just have to sit and have a cup of tea with someone when you're doing that kind of, like when you're interviewing people. It's just a very difficult thing to do over Zoom. So I've had to pause it, but I'm really excited to get back to it when we can pick it up and go visit people safely.
Amazing. We can't wait to see what you do next, Danis. And I think that is our close, and Hans is going to come back to say the final few words.
Well, thank you both so much. I mean, what an amazing conversation about an amazing film, and love to hear the process and love to hear the community around the film and everything that you're talking about, Danis and Carrie. Really, really an important conversation about incredibly important work. So thank you so much for spending the time making the film over the many years and spending the time with us tonight. Really, really, really appreciate it. This conversation among all of our visionaries and master classes goes out on the DGC national YouTube channel, as well as over the DGC podcast. So for those of you who have friends who weren't here tonight, tell them to find it there. Really important words for us all to listen to tonight. And find this movie, find Night Raiders. It's at TIFF, it's at Imaginative, it's at, I think it's in Calgary, it's at, tell us where it is, Danis. It's all over the place.
It'll be in Calgary, Edmonton, Vancouver, the Atlantic Film Festival, and then in theaters across the country on October 8th.
Amazing, amazing. Find this movie. It's one of the most important films of the year. So find it, watch it, support it, because watching it is about supporting this film. Carrie, Danis, again, thank you so much for spending this time with us. Danis, a huge congrats and good luck on the rollout of the film through the festival season and eventually through the theatrical release. Amazing work. Be well, everybody, and good night.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.
Wow. Good night.